Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the first installment of Actionstep's live roundtable series, Subject Matters, focused on leveraging digital automation and transformation. My name is Oliver Tromp, and I'm the Regional Director of Actionstep UK. Today, I will host the roundtable session and facilitate conversations between legal thought leaders in the US and UK who have all come together for this session to discuss how digital automation is affecting lawyers, clients, and the industry at large. Throughout the session, we will be covering everything from what digital automation means to lawyers today to how you can start adopting automation at your law firm. As you can see from the agenda, shortly I will introduce you to our speakers, and then we will begin discussions about leveraging digital automation and transformation. We also want to hear your perspective, so we invite you to share your experiences, ideas, and questions during the Q&A portion. You'll see on the right-hand side, you'll see a chat box. At the end of the session, we'll do our best to get through all of your questions with our thought leaders. But right now, I'd like to introduce you to all of our speakers. The speakers joining us today include Alex McPherson, founder and partner of Ignition Law. Alex set up Ignition Law in 2015, now a high-growth, full-service law firm, which has worked with many thousands of startups, scale-ups, and entrepreneurial clients to provide pragmatic and cost-effective legal services in a community-minded and ethical way. Ignition also works with many world-leading business schools, universities, family offices, and investors, and has won a number of industry awards. Outside of Ignition, Alex is an entrepreneurship expert at the Said Business School, University of Oxford, a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and sits on a corporate advisory board of LexisNexis, as well as being a non-exec director of NA Accounts, an innovative accountancy technology business. We're also joined by Sarah Cox, the co-CEO of Burlington Media Group, the place where law firm management communities access industry insight and thought-provoking content through magazines, reports, conferences, and virtual events. Sarah started out life on the help desk of a well-known legal tech supplier, going on to run their marketing function and manage the user base. She became a client of Burlington Media in the process, and in 2009 joined the business as its first employee to grow revenues as head of client services and commercials. Now she owns and runs it alongside her co-CEO, and together they have taken the pandemic as the driver to digital, successfully pivoting all aspects of the publishing brands Burlington Media owns, Briefing, LPM, LSN, into thriving online content platforms. During this time, they've also launched the data arm of the business. We're also joined by Chris Dunsford, Document Solutions Manager at Element Technologies. Chris manages a team of project managers, engineers, and trainers at Element Technologies. He's spent 20 plus years working in various enterprise content management roles, including engineering and technical support. He is the key driver in leading Element's automation projects, both for internal and ECM client projects. And finally, we've got Wayne, co-founder and partner of Cloudify Legal. Wayne spent 30 years working in tech and was asked to help a 50-person law firm transition from legacy technology to 100% cloud. The transition delivered such transformational efficiencies and profitability for the law firm that Wayne co-founded Cloudify Legal to help other firms make the transition. Today, Cloudify Legal helps law firms slash their technology spend, reduce risk, and grow profitability through automation of mundane and repetitive tasks. A legal career highlight for Wayne has been the feedback from law firm staff about how much they love cloud tech and how it helps them to just do their jobs better. We're all really excited for this session, as we truly believe that digital automation is one of the most significant steps that you can take to transform your law firm. It's really key for both streamlining your internal processes and unlocking value for your clients. In fact, in a recent report put out by Sarah's team at LPM Magazine, 43% of law firms surveyed said that optimizing their back office technology for business efficiency is their greatest business concern. So on that note, I'd like to kick us off with our first question, which I'll direct to Alex, but then would welcome the other speakers to chime in with their thoughts. So Alex, what does digital automation mean for lawyers today?
Thanks, Ollie. So I think there's probably a couple of things to think about with digital automation for lawyers today. I mean, there's obviously the point at the firm level first and foremost. There's some key decisions for management. Is the technology going to be proprietary? Is it going to be licensed in? Is it going to be a combination of both? How does it impact on culture and the politics of transition and affecting behavioural change across the leadership team, where perhaps more senior stakeholders may well be pushing back to previous processes? It means data impact assessments and all sorts of stuff to kind of manage the risk and affect transition at the firm operational level. For the actual lawyers concerned, I think there's almost two elements within that. There's similarly a sense of forced change. The pandemic in part has forced the hands of law firms that quite rightly no longer is agile working and remote working a USP or a sell to lawyers. It's an expectation. But culturally, there's an element of flexibility on the one hand, but paradoxically, perhaps a 24/7 element of always being on call, always keep an eye on things. So there's nervousness about digital automation and how it might impact lawyers of the future. And I think firms have to think quite carefully about how junior lawyers are still trained properly in processes that perhaps are being automated and replaced, especially in the context of a senior team that perhaps are in the office a little bit less than in previous years, where one would learn by osmosis. So there's all these kind of challenges, that sense of pure technological efficiency that it brings with it, but at the same time attempting not to kind of damage the culture and the tradition and the moral responsibility to train lawyers of tomorrow. I think there's a hugely exciting element for lawyers today in that the amount of innovation and the reconstruction of the profession is really quite remarkable. Even thinking back to 15 years ago when I was starting a training contract and applying to law school, you had perhaps a bit more of a dichotomy of you become a partner in a law firm, you go in-house, whereas now the profession is much more exciting and diverse. And digital automation and technology generally has allowed a huge number of lawyers to return to the profession post-children, post-setting up small businesses, working in more flexible ways, which is phenomenal. But certainly there's this kind of technological paradox that at the same time, all the traditional problems remain. And in many respects, rightly so, know how actual kind of technical learning of law, there are limits on what technology can do and digital automation can do in terms of allowing people to develop, step forwards, and certainly from the SRA's perspective, the ongoing obligations are there just as they always were for direct line reporting and career progression and seniors signing off on training contracts and technical learning. So I think in short, to me at least, it represents quite an interesting paradox of some really new exciting elements. But at the same time, a case of perhaps managing the office being on 24/7 and managing culture and technological growth and learning, just as one would have been doing before digital automation.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I'm curious, Chris, what have you seen with some of your clients? I know you work with a lot of clients who are quite advanced in adopting different forms of digital automation. Have you found that they've been more receptive to digital automation in the last couple of years?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that they're always looking for is improving efficiency and timeliness in serving their clients, right? And streamlining the flow of information to their stakeholders, and that's 24/7, right? So build out those digital automations so you don't have to be at the office doing the work. The work is done for you through automation. And then ultimately, the bottom line is lawyers want to practice law. That's what they want to do. So, you take away the time spent on all the administrative tasks or a lot of the administrative tasks, and you let them get back to the business of practicing law. But absolutely, I would say probably 1 in 3 projects that we work, there's that ask, hey, how can we implement automation? How can we make the current automation that we have in place? How can we make it better? In some clients, we've got, automation that might have been built 10 years ago, and maybe it's running on a service, on a server, and it's, running SQL statements to go out and grab information and put it somewhere else, But how can we use automation better to make that real time instead of running on a timer, for example, So it's that push to real time or near time, and pushing that information out.
Yeah, that's a great point. What are some examples of how digital automation actually impacts the life of a lawyer? Because obviously, I think you're right. Lawyers want to lawyer more, do admin less. But what are some kind of practical examples of that?
Yeah, good question. So, practical examples, just keeping it simple, right? Client intake, right? Just automating that task. In some systems, only the administrator can go in and do client intake. They're the only ones who can go in and maybe create a client or open a matter for that client. How do you separate those admin functions and allow certain individuals the freedom to do that? Maybe you go in and you automate that. Maybe there's an approval process for that you can automate, that the admin says, yes, I approve this. They're on their smart device. They say, go ahead and open this matter, so that's one, and you can think about, what if you're working, with a client or on a matter and, you need documents right away? How can you implement virtual agents, for example? I know for me, I don't like to be on my phone, typing a lot. I'm more of a verbal, user. So, how can I call up a virtual agent and say, hey, I'm working on this case, give me the documents related to this matter, the most recent, and they're delivered to your device. So those are the things that, that we can start thinking about, because that sounds far-fetched, but that's reality today. Approvals, virtual agents, self-service, allow the attorneys to be self-service, and even the clients for that matter. And there's tons more.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're living in a world that now means we expect things more immediately. And on our own terms, on our own time. The world's moved on, so why not allow clients to be able to access their information, if it is 8 p.m. in the evening or even midnight, if they're happy to not speak to someone like you like to do, Chris, if they're happy to do that and service themselves. I think there's also, to your point, Alex, too, the kind of well-being piece in this, that if lawyers, the workload and all of that, we're all, I think, much more conscientious these days about people's well-being, their workload, their stress levels, and if we can free them up to embrace a more digital future, that perhaps that is part of the well-being puzzle, the conundrum that a lot of firms are trying to overcome right now.
Yeah, I know, Wayne, you work with a lot of different law firms, and you see a lot of different firms that have adopted a lot of digital automation and some that haven't. What are some types of internal challenges that you see at law firms that are a good indicator that they may need to adopt digital automation?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's a challenge. I guess for me, automation is something I'm quite passionate about. So for me, this whole legal world and what you can automate is a bit like a kid in the candy shop. Where do I start? And I think this is some of the challenges that law firms that I've seen find themselves asking, right, well, we've probably done a lot of those sort of more common things like using templates and precedents and things like that. But where do I really start to get this value? And I think, forgive me, one of my colleagues here has said, keep it simple. Start where you can get the most value. So one of the things that I saw in a firm that we worked with closely was in the weekly in the weekly team meetings, they were encouraging their users to say, well, look, what's the biggest challenge where you're wasting time or you're finding you're losing time? And what can we do to automate that? So as soon as you can identify these small steps of change, and then you can come up with a plan, and if you don't have the expertise internally to come up with how you apply tech or process or data to it, there's plenty of people on this panel who can help. But if you can come up with a plan about how you can embrace those things and show them the value, therefore, and again, one of you have mentioned this, free up that time, get them, I think, Chris, you said, get them more client-facing, spend more time doing the things that they're trained for, which is law, and they love doing, which is, interfacing with people, and less of the back-end processes and tech. So I think if you can get that going, that tends to snowball, and that's really what I've witnessed, that growth. And for the law firm itself, of course, is now we are driving profitability and efficiency into the business. So that's probably the big one that I've seen.
One other thing that I keep hearing, speaking with law firms, is that it's really hard to attract and retain talent right now, and I think that's true in the UK and in the US. And so I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on how technology could potentially be a key aspect of attracting talent into law firms. Do you think that could be a differentiator?
I could kick that off with an example. I've had calls from lawyers who have left law firms that we've done a transformational change on with cloud technology from legacy tech, where these lawyers have changed firms and have called me up, 2 people this is, called me up and said, I had no idea what we were using and what we moved to. And now I've moved back to what we were using and I don't want to go there. So I think this is a big area for, the whole recruitment and retention piece. I liken it to a metaphor, really. If you're going to make your team or your people swim in treacle to do the job versus swim in water, you know which one you're going to go for. You want to swim in water because it feels better. And I think this is one of the real undersold value of the cloud. It allows people to do so much more for less, faster. And that benefit means happier people. Therefore, it's one of those considerations. Crikey, do I want to leave this company and go work for a company that has really poor technology? So I think there's a real opportunity there.
I think that's right. I think that's a really good point, Wayne. I mean, there was someone that joined us about a year ago, and her initial feedback was, exactly as I think we were saying earlier on. I think Chris mentioned it. Lawyers we often want to do law, but her feedback was, I felt at a previous firm it was more technology firm than it was law firm. And I think getting that balance right is really important. And as an example, we've used Actionstep for 7 years, 6 years I think it is, and that works really well. It's great. There's another piece of software that we've had that probably we'd outgrown, and we didn't realise until we moved to it that actually it wasn't quite really fit for purpose. And so I think the important thing around automation technology is to have a really kind of safe, candid culture where we've really encouraged. In fact, we've engaged an independent IT consultant who's done a huge piece of work, taking lots of feedback, having a really safe conversation of all the stuff that's not right for us with this different piece of tech that we've outgrown. And it's led to a really constructive conclusion of what it is people will actually use and will actually want. And in some respects, that's slightly different to what we might have expected. Things like version control and the way people would use a document repository are slightly different to what one would have expected. So I think there's this nuance for the lawyers in question of actually, one, having a sense of agency around the tech. Most tech is you can tweak it and customize it and make sure it's right for the culture in the firm, the way of working. At the same time, I think you have to keep an eye out for probably slower adopters and those that aren't as tech savvy. And often some lawyers, will be reluctant and reticent and have some sort of support for those folks on a more ongoing basis. But exactly as you were saying, Wayne, I think what surprised us about this old piece of technology is, 1, it cost a fortune, 2, it wasn't really customizable, and 3, a surprising amount of people weren't using it and will find their own workarounds, and that's almost a kind of worst case scenario.
Risk.
Yeah, and risk. Sorry, yeah, such a good point. Yeah, risk. I think that's such a key point.
Yeah, and a lot of those old systems, it kept the workforce local. There wasn't that broad, where I can work from anywhere, right? And so, when law firms are looking, at vendors, that's what they need to be looking at. They need to be looking at those vendors and those partners, that are embracing automation, and that are embracing that, hey, I can log into, this, case management, matter management system from anywhere and do my work on the go. A lot of the old technology, you would have the VPN, and then, that was slow. And what happens when your connection is lost and you have missing edits in your documents, etc. So, again, law firms partnering with those vendors and with, those consultants are embracing technology. That's the key.
With my technologist hat on, I would encourage the audience to sort of look at total cost of ownership, because quite often, to that point that Chris has just made there, as soon as your system goes down and you have X number of fee earners and support staff unable to work, that's a cost. And it's something that I see in moving within the law firms that we've been working with. There's no real understanding of that opportunity, great detail of opportunity costs. Everyone knows it's a pain and it's costing money, but when you sit back and analyze the cost of some of that, it's huge. So it's another area of making sure your automation is going to deliver. Have a clear problem that you want to solve, a clear approach to solving that, and an ROI on that problem. So.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think obviously a lot of the audience are probably really keen. They're here because they're keen to adopt digital automation, or they have to some degree, but it can be overwhelming. What would be a good place for law firms to start?
I think it all depends on the firm. So one size does not fit all. So it might be that some firms are more advanced. I'm sure there's firms on here today who have already undertaken some transformation projects, whereas others are still in the early stages, as we've said. So picking out what is the right route for them. But as we said earlier, starting with the people internally and going, what is it that is creating the bottlenecks in the firm, and how can we make more informed, data-driven choices in the future? Let's not be led on feel. Let's actually take our strategy forward based on the truth, and one version of the truth. If you've got those integrated systems, that's the potential there, isn't it? That you're not having all these conflicting messages across the business. So starting with the internal, the kind of conversations with the lawyers themselves and the wider support staff, and then moving that out into clients, and generate that client feedback. Because as I say, it won't be one size fits all. Different firms do different things as well, so there's different areas of expertise in regards to whichever firm you might be.
I think it is also hard for a lot of law firms to sort of decipher or work out how they're going to go through the marketing maze that they have to deal with. And they're having so many messages thrown at them in and around things like, just to throw some terms out there, these shiny new things like AI and all the rest, which can feel and sound very overwhelming if you go, oh, crikey, I don't really know a lot about that. So back to your point, Sarah, and I think Chris mentioned it earlier, keeping it simple. If you can get the team buy-in to come up with what gives you and I and the team the most value, and get those small wins going, you'll be amazed at what can actually happen. So I would encourage to start small and less complex. I've seen some pretty interesting projects, or heard more about interesting projects that are incredibly complex, using some incredible technology. Using the analogy of crawl, walk, run. Unless you've done all the crawling and done all the walking and running, great, then get into the really complex stuff. But if you haven't, park all the complex, keep it simple.
Yeah, and I will go back to partnering right with vendors, partnering with consultants, because there's a lot that you just don't know. There's a lot out there that you can do. One of the questions is well, what can we automate in our firm? Well, the actual question should be, what can't we? Because you can quite literally just about automate anything. Even with older systems, there's RPA, robotics process automation, right? So, if there's no web API to interface with those systems, we can develop automation that goes in and does literally, you will see the mouse moving and clicking on things and taking information and putting it into systems. So, what can't you automate? Work with your consultants, partner with your vendors, and maybe even choose a champion at your site, that where you can, task that person and say, I want you to champion automation. I want you to go out and just, dive in and learn. There's a lot of, YouTube stuff out there, I mean, that walks through a lot of stuff, with, even Actionstep, Zapier, net documents, the power platforms. So just identify that key person in your organization.
I think that's a good idea. We're having that where we're looking at the moment to automate pre-populated emails. On the point that Wayne was making earlier, as much as anything else to manage risk, to kind of include caveats and what's beyond scope, as much as to kind of also save on time. But what's been interesting about that is, to me, as probably an early stage tech adopter, it's obvious. Of course, you invest a bit of time with someone helping code up Excel's Outlook so that you can hit a button and have the most common sorts of emails pre-populated. You can tweak into your own style. But for a lot of other folks that are busy, that's not anywhere near top of their list. And so actually we found finding a couple of stakeholders and buying a smaller chunk of licenses to kind of test this out has been a good way to go. It's not gone in a ubiquitous sense. Not everybody wants to use that automated email solution, but it's definitely led on to people that were perhaps not so keen to adopt it, seeing the solution, seeing the benefits actually in practice, and then asking to kind of grab the reins and get involved as well. And I think that's a good way to kind of do it, rather than to attempt to go for a blanket, emperor commanding the waves approach universally, to allow a discrete group to kind of try something, to allow it to pivot and to fail fast if it doesn't work, but then to kind of expand it a little bit from there. And that can still represent success if you've got 40% of people actually using the technology that you're seeking to implement, and the rest saying we're good as we are for now. That's actually not a bad solution vis-a-vis, purporting for it to be 100% and 60% of people finding workarounds.
Oliver, I'm not sure if you've been asked from the audience a question around some of the pitfalls or the shall we say, the rabbit holes of automation. And I think that's something that might be worth touching on. One of the things that I've tended to see is, and I'd sort of just get everyone to try and think outside of the box. I know that's a bit of a cliche term, but it's easy to think about the way that we've always done things around here. So let's automate the way we've always done things around here. That may not necessarily be the best way of going about it. I'll give you an example of, I think we tend to, we humans and business are pretty good at sort of doing small incremental steps. Like an example driven by COVID, of course, was creating a document. And, if we go back far enough, we used to all print those and send those out in the post. And of course, that's old hat now. Everyone's emailing them out. And then COVID forced us to do electronic signatures. But if you stop and think about that process before you make the change, there's quite often some quantum leaps that you can go forward on. An example would be, and I'm a big proponent of this, is about not just making it good for your lawyer internally, but make it great for your client. That client experience is huge. And I've got a personal experience I'd like to throw on the table for all of you, who, especially if you've been in a property sale, which I'm sure is pretty most everyone. Bought and sold a house last year. Oh my gosh, I was just shocked. I found a great company to work with, a great person. And then I received a barrage of emails with a barrage of documents that I was expected to print, fill in, scan, and email back, and it was just difficult. So that whole process of automation that they thought they'd done is yesteryear technology, right? So you can leapfrog that these days by capturing data so quickly, and this is the power of cloud tools, of course, by allowing your clients just to click one link and fill in all that data on any device, making it easy for them. And naturally, if they're 80, you would do it for them. But so you've got to look after all your clients. But allowing your clients to self-serve and provide the spelling of the names correctly and your date of birth, more or less, and then populating that in an automated process where you have your KYC and AML processes built into your electronic document signing built into it. So that data capture piece is really, really key. And saves a lot of time, effort, and money.
Yeah, just on that point, I think one of the key pieces that we've seen in LPM magazine is focusing on being able to capture that data even before they've become a client. So how can you handle your BD activities so that your prospects are going into the system before a matter is even opened? That's got to be very much a change from when I started out in legal 20 years ago. That wasn't, you had to wait until they were a client, really, and that was away you went. I think also in the LPM space, particularly the reference, Oliver, earlier to the LPM Frontiers research that we did that was released in April. A lot of the firms in the LPM audience are really struggling with the central hub, their PMS platform, because there's been so much consolidation, there's been so many acquisitions. There are a lot of firms, particularly amongst the LPM audience, who maybe discounted a practice management system a year ago, but have now been saddled with that supplier now because of an acquisition. And so the choice, when I look at the last 20 years of how the legal practice management landscape has changed, the choice available has really, really narrowed. And I think a lot of those readers are in particular struggling with that central decision about should I stay or should I go? And maybe that's kind of impeding their decision to automate and take other projects forward because they've got to get that central platform right, and investment right in the future strategy.
Yeah, I think that's so key. And also what we were talking about earlier, just as far as really understanding your firm and your staff and the needs and the pain points. It's so important when really figuring out the right tech that's going to enable your firm to kind of automate in the ways that it needs to. So,
Ollie, and at Cloudify, we talk about effectively, you're building a skyscraper. You don't want to build this on yesteryear technology, or using the analogies, a skyscraper on quicksand. You want to build it on a solid cloud foundation that you can embrace the technology that comes along quickly. And back to really what Alex was saying about, you don't have to get it perfect, but you can do constant iterations. This thing is a journey, not a destination. Automation's a journey, not a destination. So I think getting that base layer of really good, solid practice management tech in place allows you to start really incrementally building value, profitability, and efficiency on top. I think that's a really big opportunity for law firms, and it's getting more, as I think everyone knows, it's getting more and more competitive these days. Being able to produce the law, doing a great job at it reliably, decreasing your risk, increasing your compliance, but without hampering your staff. It's quite a mix. You've got a balance, but it can be done. And the secret really is starting on that journey, that cloud journey.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think maybe it's time now to move on to the Q&A section. I know we've got some questions that I want to get through. So, but before we do, I'd like to maybe just summarize some of the key points, and then if anyone else has any kind of final thoughts before we move on to the Q&A. I think one of the themes that I think came out is just obviously it's really important to work with your consultants, speak with your staff, really understand the things that are causing pain and taking the most time, and just to take a step back and ask, like you were saying, Chris, not what can we automate, but what can't we automate, and just thinking a bit more creatively. And then also, just realizing that digital automation not only saves lawyers time and improves the quality of their work, but it also provides a better and more consistent client experience. So it's really a win-win for everyone. But going on to our Q&A section, and again, we've got a few questions that have come through, but if anyone else has any burning questions, feel free to put those in the chat as well. The one that I wanted to hit on first, which maybe we can start with you on this, Alex, but anyone else, any other thoughts? Let's see. Can you give some examples of how digital automation has freed up time for lawyers?
Yeah. So some practical examples of that are so I think there's time, there's also risk, and the other thing that we didn't touch on, which is relevant too, is making the firm sticky and attractive to clients, that actually, if it's done well, the client will be quite happy with the with the way the documents are organised, that signings are managed. It can actually be a real point of attraction to kind of want to stick with a firm if you've got things done properly. To be specific, preparing for funding rounds, having stuff in a really neat and tidy way. Actually, speaking to a client last night, 3D printing client, and they're actually the way that the documents are organised and structured is a really positive point for them, because we know the direction of travel of that business. So that was just one point I think we to throw in as an ancillary one to the discussion earlier, is actually if you get it right, it can be sticky, both in terms of clients wanting to stay put, and to the extent there is turnover in fee earners, making it really easy for new fee earners to pick up in an efficient way. So, I mean, in terms of how automation's making life easier and more efficient for lawyers, well, there's certainly that point that if it's done properly, it makes it pretty easy and seamless to kind of grab, to hop onto a piece of work to affect holiday cover efficiently. There's those kind of elements. There's the onboarding experience, which most lawyers, really don't enjoy getting too involved in AML, KYC, engagement letters. The SRA rules are such that you have to be clear about the scope of work in an engagement letter. And if you're doing that in a non-automated way, it's a real pain point for the lawyers. It's a real bottleneck for actually engaging, getting going with business. Under the SRA rules, you can get going to some extent in tandem if you've got good reason to. But having a quick, slick process to onboard, one, creates a great first impression for clients, but two, frees up a lot of the fee earner time on the more less palatable, less exciting areas. Elements such as doing fee scopes, having again the kind of dry but important scopes, caveats. We're not providing tax or regulatory advice. All those sorts of things, you can automate that in a quick fee estimate. Jobs that might have sat at the bottom of the to-do list for a day or two, got to do that fee scope, the fee update to client. If you've got 60% of the email written for you, and you can kind of actually articulate it in your own tone of voice, you can go back quicker, better from a risk management perspective, which is so key and overlooked, that Wade was mentioning. But that's a practical area. I think there's stuff that we've semi-automated, some proprietary tech we built out ourselves, which is around 360 conversations. And again, if those are in paper form, none of us really are that great at getting to them, and yet they're such a fundamental part of someone's career. And if you were slow, as often happens doing a 360 conversation appraisal, probably things that you wanted to say, feedback you wanted to give gets bottled up, and you can lead to things not being articulated, relationships not being so good. But actually, if you can use, as a practical example, using technology to speed up 360 feedback conversations and to articulate it in a good way via a leg up from automation, has really helped a more candid, transparent culture, and some really helpful feedback. There's some stuff I love it. I love getting feedback of things you can do differently and do better. And traditionally that's really relevant to lawyers of today, post-pandemic, where like I'm not in the office at the moment yet. You really want to feel bonded and connected to your colleagues and your team. And so, as I said at the start, there's this technological paradox, whereas on the one hand, I think it was something that Chris was talking about earlier. You can have technology looking for a solution to solve, and automation doing, and that's a disaster. But if you've got that balance right of old-fashioned appraisals, software, onboarding, document management, fee scoping, you still got the old-fashioned stuff that's done by a human being, and you're paying the premium for that lawyer and their expertise. And I don't think that's ever going to change. But actually, if you've got the tech doing a lot of the legwork to kind of free them up, possibly even give them hours back in the day rather than pushing them to work ever harder and longer, then I think that's quite a key way to go.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand also, with automation, you're never going to get away from, the human element, right? But you can reduce the human element, right? Which the human element, causes quality problems, right? And that's what we're really trying to get beyond, is those quality issues. So if you can take away 50% of the human element, maybe even 75, that's a win, and kind of getting to, some practical examples. I mean, think about contract reviews, right? You've got a process now where you have to email contracts out for reviews, and then someone forgets or someone goes on holiday, and then you're waiting, and it's causing delays, etc. Can you build out an automation system using Power Apps or something like that, to where they being the requester can go in and fill out the information. Folks get emailed, or they get Teams messages or Slack messages, right? And then you have a dashboard where that legal reviewer can go in and look at who's assigned to review the contract, and then those notifications go back out when it's reviewed, and then the document or the contract automatically gets saved to the DMS. Those are ideas, for example.
Great points.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to come back around to Sarah. One of the things you had said was how with a lot of the research you guys are doing, the practice management system is kind of the core. And Wayne, you mentioned it as well. If you're building a skyscraper, you need to have a strong foundation for that. And I'm just curious. One of the questions that came in was about that. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. The question is, what types of automation should law firms be looking for from their practice management system?
Well, I guess that depends on the capability of the practice management system. If you've invested wisely and well with something that's got that, the kind of API potential, you can plug in other solutions to it, or whether you're looking to customize it and bespoke it more yourselves. But ultimately, I mean, client portals have to be an obvious win. It's where we all want to be, wherever we are in life. Whether it's me hailing a cab, with Uber, we all thought that was revolutionary when it first started. And now you look at your phone and you're going, well, where's my taxi? I want it sooner. Why is it going to take 5 minutes? Why isn't it going to be here? I want it teleported right here, right now. So, that immediacy piece again, but that's another area that in our research has come up as, kind of a fundamental investment issue is with client portals and being able to allow clients to self-serve.
And I think for me, there's another area, if we sort of reframe it, where do you get your most bang for buck? I think a lot of firms have probably done the document piece, the precedents and the generations of documents, and could always extend that out further. But we're seeing an area that is probably less exploited is the whole, if you think about the business, it's about data, people, and processes. You got to have all three working in harmony to make things right. So, and you wrap that with tech, of course. But, taking that client experience piece that Alex and Chris were just talking about there, if you can make that experience, and with cloud tools now it's so easy, so quick, and it's so cost effective to do, to actually help these clients on board in a fashion that captures data and pushes it into a data storage, your practice management system. And then that just facilitates all that automation that probably law firms have invested in over the years, which is creating the document, creating the product, the service, freeing up your people to talk, to communicate with your clients. And that just, I think Alex touched on this is your repeat business process where your clients enjoying working with you. Actually, I think you also did it, Chris, we were talking about spending time with your clients is what it's about. And that's what lawyers and support staff tend to want to do. They want to be there, not having to open up a matter. So I think there's some really quick wins on the onboarding piece that haven't really been exploited. And I think, and Sarah, I don't know if you've seen it in your LPM surveys, but I think this is going to be a big growth area if it's not already in your survey.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Onboarding.
Yeah, because I think there's some good stuff you can do. So funnily enough, we just chatted to a firm about this and sharing the results from this IT consultant that was looking at tweaking some of the automation we do for setting up new clients, Wayne, and the idea being that actually, if you really think through how you want the matters set up, having a subfolder for the firm, template memorandum for any risk or concerns, file notes, key emails, actually getting that structure right. One, you can automate it every time, so the onboarding team save time, but two, it increases the chances of lawyers actually saving things in the correct places if it's quick and easy to do. If they've got the templates at their fingertips through automation on how to get it off the intranet or the cloud, I think you can get some really easy wins there in terms of, again, risk management as well as client service and efficiency.
What I think about one quick simple win when firms are looking at their telephony requirements, because I know there's been a lot of change over the years, moving away from hardware and software to IP solutions, but taking that one step further. Some of this, there's solutions around now that will allow the person to make a call or receive a call, to record the call, and to also transcribe that call. And the solutions we tend to deal with go straight into Actionstep and time record instantly. So the whole thing is seamless, and it's just part of the solution. So these are real quick wins. And what I love about that piece is it just starts to mitigate risk. You're capturing what's going on and what's being said verbatim. So it allows you, and your attendance notes can then be tidied up and again, saving time, being more efficient, driving profitability. So there's just lots of things that you can do. So just work out areas that might be painful for your team members, ask them what would help them, and make a start, show up and get going on them. And everyone on this panel can add value, ask questions. We're here to help.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we have time for one last question, and I think this is actually a good question to end on. Let's see. How do you think automation will evolve for law firms in the future?
It's a good question.
I think the techies to start with.
Well, it's continuous improvement, right? I mean, if you think about automation has its roots way back. If we look back at the 20th century, right, we're thinking, Six Sigma, we're thinking lean manufacturing, right? The Toyota method, for example, right? And then, really digital automation really came about in the 1980s, and so, that's when, like you think about BPM, business process management, business process automation, right? And then we get into this new digital everything, it's just, that's all it is. It's continuous improvement, right? Continuous quality. That's what we're looking for. So, and quite honestly, there's no real good answer to that question other than the sky is the limit, and as long as we're focusing on, the right things, on automating for quality, automating to make us more scalable, right? That's where we're going to win. You don't automate just to automate. You automate, and I think, Alex, you said this, right? It's all about those sticky clients, right? Get those sticky clients, streamline your processes, make sure that interaction with your clients is smooth, and your quality is high, and you'll have sticky clients.
I'd agree with that, and I'd add one thing, two things to it. The first being, I definitely think, and back to your point there, Chris, it's a journey again. So one thing that's going to be really key is it's going to be client-led rather than firm or lawyer-led for me. And I think the really big next move is that we traditionally look at ourselves as individual teams and a firm. And that's all very well, but the reality is, and a lot of the things that we do, we're just one firm talking to another firm with a client in the middle. And there's a classic example. In fact, I'm sure everyone on this call who's on LinkedIn and sees the human cry around the conveyancing world and the challenges, the communication challenges that they face. And there's a simple answer that tech can help with here, and that is bringing all these entities together and being able to communicate on, doesn't matter what systems you're on, in real time together. And the property example for me, for anyone who's interested in this, is, and we're doing some stuff with Actionstep here, in and around Cojute, for bringing all the entities of a property deal together so you can see data real time. And it suddenly just cuts out the plethora of comms. Have you got the money in yet? You know, have you done the TR1 yet? Can you exchange? And that's just email, telephone nightmare. So I think these are the areas where we're going to see intercompany and systems connectivity from data and processes really starting to deliver value. I think if anyone told me it was all about we're going to replace lawyers with AI, I might smile politely and walk off in the other direction. But well, I probably have a few words to say as well. But I think that's where it's going to be, coming together and playing together as teams and individuals and companies across an industry. I think that's where it's really going to develop.
I think that's a brilliant answer, Wayne. It's a really good point, because I think what you were describing there is really interesting. The property side, or we recently had our wills done, and it was just unbelievable. It's been like a year since we started, and still haven't got invoiced yet. So it's not great for the firm, you know, great firm that are doing it. But you kind of think the process, there's so much automation there would hugely facilitate the client journey and client expectations. And incidentally, on property, it's, you know, residential property is one of the highest risk areas, because like you say, those phone calls, you just miss one thing, it's on the professional indemnity. So it's a brilliant area where automation, and I would imagine, I'm not a resident property lawyer, but I would imagine from a lawyer's perspective, you get to do more glamorous stuff on the deal, speaking to the client, and that's a brilliant use of automation. I think on the kind of tech paradox side of life, I think, you know, hopefully the 900 quid an hour Magic Circle pensions expert at Clifford Chance isn't going anywhere, and nor is that price point, but perhaps automation can help client delivery in terms of, you know, 3 juniors that are going along with that individual at 250 quid an hour, whatever it is. That's the bit there can probably be better value delivery. But of course, the key caveat on that is that all firms have got this huge moral responsibility to train up lawyers of tomorrow, and making sure that the old-fashioned learning by osmosis and article clerks, as it was, you know, many years ago, that isn't neglected. Which is so easy to do. We've had there's only about 80 of us, and we're much smaller, but we deliberately run a deliberately traditional work experience program, trying to bring lawyers into the profession, so that we do that in a very analog way. But I think that element hopefully lawyers of tomorrow won't be compromised if they aren't getting the same exposure as they did to a lot of the black line markups and the kind of very traditional ways of learning, and having that shocker where you sent something in to a partner, thought it was great, got it. But hopefully we can find a way to navigate that important moral imperative to train lawyers up, whilst also accepting this different generation, different asks and requirements as to how lawyers want to be trained. But hopefully tech strikes the right balance with automation on that.
Yeah, real good point there, Alex. I think, and something we probably missed when we talked about the people element. You know, what I see is an insatiable desire to use tech from the young people. So that's an area that law firms need to be cognizant of, and make sure that you can retain good people and invest in them to grow into those experienced lawyers. But if you're not satisfying them with good tech, it gets harder to hang on to them. So just something to add to that earlier conversation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Sarah, any final thoughts from you?
No, I was just going to say there's a lot in this around this conversation, this debate in the report that you referenced at the start. So I would urge everyone to go and have a read of that. Sorry, the sunshine's come out down here in London. Yeah, do go, and there's a lot in there about we always benchmark firms in terms of what do they see as the product in the future that's going to make them more competitive and more efficient, and then we bucket it, you know, where there's a kind of cross section across the two. You know, I'm looking at it now. Portals and apps is the kind of standout But there's other things in there like collaboration tools and CRM, as well as AI does come up there. Sorry, to say that. I know it pains you, Wayne, for me to say that. Maybe they need to understand what AI actually means, but that's a whole other webcast.
Right. Nice one. Well, yeah, thank you so much for our speakers. I think this kind of wraps up our session. And thank you everyone for joining us for our live roundtable series, Subject Matters, focused on leveraging digital automation and transformation. We hope everyone's enjoyed the session and found it insightful. I know I've learned a lot from it. We'll have a recording of the session to you in the next few days. And in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, feel free to email marketing@actionstep.com. Great session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ollie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.